Hello everyone. Today we are going to discuss on the chapter object oriented concepts. Now in this chapter we are going to study about an overview of an object oriented concepts. We are also going to understand the related terminologies such as objects, classes, and we are also going to learn what are the advantages and limitations of object oriented concepts, and we are going to identify what are the applications where we are going to use this object oriented concepts. Now this technique of object oriented programming provides advantages in creation and development of softwares for real life applications. So what is object oriented programming? It is a model that combines data and functions into one single unit called as an object. Now if you look at this diagram, that an object is a collection of data and functions. Now one object can interact with another objects without any identifications. The functions of an object is called as member functions. These member functions are used to access the data of an object, but data cannot be accessed directly, and hence this technique is hidden, and this technique is called as object oriented programming. Now let's understand what is a difference between procedure oriented programming and an object oriented programming. Now in procedure oriented programming, large programs are divided into smaller programs which are known as functions. But in object oriented programming, programs are divided into objects. In procedure oriented, it follows a top down approach, whereas in object oriented it follows bottom up approach. In procedure oriented, data may communicate with each other, but they communicate with the functions. If you go for object oriented programming, objects are communicated with each other with the help of functions as well as an objects. Now in procedure, we emphasize or concentrate more on emphasize more on procedure rather than data. But if you go for object oriented, you emphasize more on data rather than procedure. In procedure oriented programming, a data is not hidden. It's because we don't have any kind of access specifiers here, but it is more secure when we go for object oriented. It's because we have an access specifiers which are private, public and protected. With the help of these access specifiers, we can secure our data in object oriented programming. The other difference is, if I want to make any modifications in our program, it's very complicated in procedure oriented programming, but it's very easy when we go for object oriented, because we have functions here. We can easily interact with that only functions or modify or debug and then again re-execute it. If we do the same case in procedure oriented, we have to alter the entire program. The last difference would be overloading is not possible in procedure oriented, but overloading is possible in the form of operator and function overloading in object oriented programming. Now one example of these two differences is procedure oriented would be a C language, whereas object oriented would be your C++ language. Now let's see what are the basic concepts of OOPs. The basic concepts of OOPs are objects, classes, data abstraction, data encapsulation, inheritance, overloading, polymorphism, dynamic binding, and message passing. Let's try understanding what are these one by one. So let's understand what is an object. Objects are basic building blocks for designing any kind of programs. An object is a collection of data members and associated member functions. Now here object can be anything. It could be a person, a place, or a table of data. Now how to identify which is an object and which is a class? Let's take an example. If I create a class called as fruit, then objects of a class fruit would be apple or orange or mango or any with unique name we create an objects. If you look at this diagram, we have an object called as student, where we have collection of data members and member functions into it. Now these data members are name of a student or registration number, course of a student. Now its member functions could be to accept the data and to display the data, for which I created a function called as getData and display. What is class? Class is a collection of objects that have an identical properties, common behavior, and shared relationship. Now if we create a class, we can create any number of objects as we want. Now classes are user defined data types which holds both data and functions in it. Now let's say, for example, if my class is a solar system, then planets, sun, moon are members of class solar system. Now let's take a general example of class and an object. If I create a class with student, then my objects of a class student can become either school student or college student or postgraduate student. If I create a class called as book, then my object would be physics, chemistry, maths, bio, statistics, computer science. Or if I create a class called as city, then my object would be any place of a city. It could be Hubli, Bangalore, Mumbai, Pune, Goa, etc., etc. Now let's take one example where I'll make you understand what's the difference between class and an object. Now let's say if I create a class called as vehicle, then my members would be model, color, and price. Okay, and if I take a change gear and application of brake, what are these? These are member functions. Now what are these data members and member functions in a class vehicle? When I create a data member, these are nothing but a variables which could be different model of a vehicle or a different color of a vehicle or its price. But when we say functions, that is member functions, that means it is related to changing of gear in a vehicle, or how to apply a brake, or what are its different engines present in a vehicle. So this becomes my member functions, and these are embedded into a class called as vehicle. Now your class is my vehicle and my object is bus, car, or bike, or any unique name which you can give it to class vehicle. Now let's understand what is data abstraction. Data abstraction is nothing but trying to produce only whatever is required without an external background. Data abstraction, it refers to the process of representing essential features without including background details or any explanations. So here data abstraction, that means you are abstracting a data which is required and excluding whatever is not required. What is data encapsulation? It's a wrapping of data and functions into a single unit which is called as class, and this process is called as data encapsulation. It's nothing but providing a hiding feature for your programs with the help of access specifiers. So with the help of data encapsulation, we are trying to hide the data. With this method, which we are using in object oriented, to specially used to hide any information. Now what is inheritance? Inheritance is the process by which one object acquires the properties of another object. Whenever we use inheritance, we create a base class or a derived class. If you look at this diagram, this is a base class and this is derived class. Now what's the difference between base and derived class? The existing class is called as base class, or we also call it as a superclass. The new class, which is derived from a base class, becomes your derived class. Now these derived classes, these share some of the properties of base class, and therefore a code from a base class can be reused by n number of derived classes which we use it from base class. Now what's overloading? Now overloading comes in two different types. It could be either function overloading or it could be an operator overloading. Overloading means we are trying to allow an object to have different meaning depending upon the context. When an existing operator operates on new data type, it is called as an operator overloading. Then what is function overloading? When two or more functions having same name but differ in number of arguments or its data type or the parameters which we are passing, then such functions are called as function overloading. Next concept of OOPS would be polymorphism. Now here polymorphism is the ability of an operator and function to take multiple forms. Here poly means many and morphism means form. So here we are trying to use this polymorphism to create an object with multiple forms. For example, a boy in a college can behave as a student, or if I take a same boy who is traveling in a bus, I'll consider him as a passenger. Or if I take a same boy who's laying in a hospital, I'll consider him as a patient. So if you look at this polymorphism concept, and a same similar boy is behaving as a student, as a patient, as a passenger, depending upon the scenario. So such concept is called as polymorphism. If you look at this diagram, I'm trying to draw a shape. So if I look at this shape, I can draw either a triangle or a circle or a rectangle. That means my one draw method is behaving differently in this. That is, you're drawing a triangle, second time you're drawing a rectangle, third time you're drawing a circle. So this concept is called as polymorphism. Now what is the next concept of OOPS? And that would be your dynamic binding. Dynamic binding is nothing but the process of connecting one program to another program. Now, but when is this linking take place? It takes place at runtime, and such procedure of linking at runtime is called as dynamic binding. The last concept of OOPS, that would be your message passing. Now this is similar to what we send a messages. This is done by an objects. So a message for an object is request for execution of a procedure. So here message passing involves specifying the name of an object, the name of a function, and the which information that you need to be sent. For example, I have a college which is an object, and the message which I want to pass is marks, and the information which I want to pass is a result. So altogether this is a message passing. So let's see what are the advantages of OOPS. The advantages of OOPS are the improved software development productivity due to its modularity concepts, which can be reused. So here it reduces the code duplication. We can reuse the same code again and again, which helps us to develop our programs much faster when compared to procedure oriented. Now here creation and implementation of OOP code is quite easy, and it reduces a software development cost as well as time. The concept of data abstraction, it separates to provide only the required information rather than giving an entire detail of the content. Now, data encapsulation along with the functions, with the help of encapsulated data, we are providing some data security so that the external non-member functions should not be able to access or modify our data. The other advantage is an inheritance, where we can easily able to develop a complex software. It's because complexity can be minimized with the help of inheritance. Now OOPS can communicate through message passing, which makes or helps to interface description with outside system with very simple manner. So with the help of an objects, we can interact with other programs easily. Let's see what are the drawbacks of OOPS. When we have large program size, OOPS typically involves more lines of code when compared to procedural programs. Now OOPS typically are slower than procedure based programs. It's because they require more instructions to be executed. It's not suitable for all type of programs. Now to convert a real world problem into an object oriented, it's very difficult. Now OOPS software development, or it could be debugging or testing, these tools are not standardized. Polymorphism and dynamic binding, it requires processing time, and due to overload of function calls during runtime, this becomes lots of complications. And the one more drawback of OOPS is like the techniques which we use called as inheritance or polymorphism or encapsulations. These are pretty challenging to manage initially, and for these all things we need to have certain knowledge of object oriented programming. What are its applications of OOPS? Now we can see n number of applications which we use it in our day-to-day life. That would be your computer graphics applications, or it could be your computer-aided design or computer-aided machine softwares, or it could be used if I want to interact with the database of an object oriented, or it could be used to design an UI such as Windows operating system, or it could be for real-time systems or handling complex simulations and modeling. It could be also used to design an artificial intelligence and expert systems. We can also use OOPS for client server systems, for web-based applications, for image processing, and mobile and parallel computing. So these are some of the applications which we use for object-oriented programming. In next sessions, we'll see you in next videos. Thank you.